tell us who you are, but also specifically in relation to the movies that you've recently completed. What are some of the initial signposts when you started working on these projects that signaled to you that there would be certain kinds of things that would be difficult in terms of resources, in terms of access, and so forth? So I want to start with Alexandria here, and your film Frame by Frame, which deals with Afghan photographers. Clearly not an easy place to go to, and not an easy situation for people who are born there and working there. Tell us a little bit about uncovering this particular subject matter and what some of the initial challenges were that you faced in putting together a movie about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deb, for inviting me on this panel, and Dr. Massey, thanks for having me. I think some of the biggest challenges of going into frame by frame and making a story about Afghanistan at all is that it wasn't necessarily that people felt controversy about the place or the topic, like they would like abortion or something like that, but it was more that they felt fatigue of hearing about it for so long. And so going in, it was something where we wanted to bring something different to the table, especially back in 2013 when we were doing the majority of the filming. There wasn't a lot of films up to that point that showed things other than the military side of the story, the U.S. military side, and so wanted to bring a story about Afghans that were telling stories about Afghans. And so going in, yeah, I think the biggest challenges were that we held a certain standard of we needed to get out of the car, and we needed to get on tripods, and we needed to have steady shots, because a lot of the things that you were seeing at that point were, you know, there's always a classic, I'm in a car in Afghanistan and I'm shooting out the window and there's a burqa, and like, so I think for us, we were trying to combat people's perception of a place that is this unknown known that they thought that they knew. And in that, we were getting, you know, into situations that even our photographers were surprised that we were following them into these situations that they were kind of trying to push us back at a lot of different times, like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to come? So we were following them in everything that they were doing because we felt it was important to get out of the car and in with them.
And on a more practical note, who financed your ability to do all this stuff?
I sold my car, and initially it was, I wanted the film to be as independent as possible, because I felt like every time I was going to any outlet, it kept on going towards a story of war or towards a story that I didn't want it to do. And a lot of people weren't on board, and I wasn't able to articulate exactly what I wanted at first. And so it was important for the first shoot, especially, that it was independently funded. It was just, you know, I did a lot of commercial work. I sold my car, I sold all these belongings. I borrowed, begged, and stealed for any funding I could get for our independent funds. And then after that, we did a Kickstarter. And then we had executives producers come on, and then investments slowly, but very little grants, mostly just independent people, donations and investments.
But you had Final Cut.
Yeah, and that was important for us, especially for this story, because I think telling a story about Afghanistan, you kind of walk this very thin line when it comes to ethics and what story you're telling. And so we wanted to keep it as independent, and I think that was our first and foremost, most important thing, that it needed to be as independent as possible to the very final cut.
Dan, thanks for being here. Now, you produced a movie on a very important topic, so I apologize if I botch its name. How to Let Go of the World and Embrace Climate Change. Help me out here.
How to let go of the world and love all the things climate can't change.
Love all the things climate can't change. Which tells you a little bit about what the movie's focused on. But your own way into it, I think, is quite fascinating and speaks very much to the topic that we're dealing with today. So can you walk us through what you've been through with this movie and kind of where you are right now with it?
Sure. So the movie is about I worked on this film with Josh Fox, who directed the Gasland films. This is kind of the third in that series, but it's broader, and as you can tell from the title, it's about global climate change, which should not be a controversial topic, but it is. We wanted to make a different kind of climate film that's not arguing that it's happening, but more looking, making an introspective film that addresses the existential crisis that we go through as individuals in coming to terms with all the changes that are happening with climate change and that are going to keep happening, and the human rights crises that are happening as a result of it. And so the film is, you know, it travels to all different countries, finding people that are on the front lines of climate change and looking to them for like moral guidance, like how do they keep going in the face of these disastrous impacts as we all, you know, become on the front line, as we all join them on the front lines of climate change. So those are the things that climate can't change, are these values inside of us that we have to hold on to maintain our humanity and dignity. So I've been, in making this film over the past several years, and before then, I've been covering stories that address climate change and social justice issues. And recently I was covering another climate-related action. It was the shutting down of the Canadian oil sands pipelines. All the Canadian oil sands that comes into the U.S. comes through 5 pipelines, and I got word of a direct action that was taking place wherein 5 people would turn the emergency shutoff valves on those 5 pipelines and close down all of the flow of Canadian oil sands. I was filming at the Keystone Pipeline in North Dakota when the activists turned the valve there. And I was doing so completely legally on public property. And when the police came to arrest the activists, they arrested me as well. Even though I told them that I was a filmmaker, I was within my First Amendment rights, and I was on public property. And I was subsequently held in jail for 53 hours and then charged with 45 years worth of felonies. So I don't feel like I was courting controversy by just doing my job, but that's what it turned out to be.
And it's really powerful to have you here, and thank you for talking us through that. I think we're going to dig deeper into some of the reasons why things are perceived as controversial on this panel, and also, you know, what does it take to get the kind of access that you need to make these stories happen? Because if you don't think something should be controversial, you have to convince other people to kind of operate on that wavelength as well. So Matt, let's talk a little bit about that based on your experiences with Cartel Land, which, you know, in some ways you could say is about the war on drugs. In other ways, it's more specifically about what's going on in Mexico right now and the very deeply divided kind of society that's dealing with kind of an underground economy of sorts. Now that could be perceived as controversial for some people, and for other people it's just their way of life. When you started working on it, how was it sort of perceived in your circle?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the point of this panel is not to have a semantic debate on what is controversy, but I think it's important to sort of delineate between what is quote-unquote controversial and how you're shooting a film and what happens out in the field, and the sort of delicacy with which in the environment that you're filming in, versus the marketing of the film and overtly trying to make something controversial and you know, capture sort of a zeitgeist moment and insert yourself into that and try to create a dialogue around that. But you know, in terms of your question, I was just trying to tell a story. You know, I was trying to find characters that moved me, and that's what I've tried to do with the films I make is find sort of dark corners of the world and shed light on them. I didn't do it because I wanted to court controversy. I didn't do it because I wanted to give voice to people who were voiceless, and I wanted to find a characters that were on a journey, and I wanted to go with them on that journey. And I think verite films like that, I had no idea where the story was going to end. I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea that this story that I thought was about people wearing white shirts fighting against evil would ultimately become a story about people who were becoming evil. And that ultimately did become a story of controversy, a story of government involvement with cooking meth and the blurry lines between those who are fighting against the cartels themselves, and the government. But I had no idea that's the story that I was starting out to make.
Emre, with your film Naledi, A Baby Elephant's Tale, you have, again, as Matt said, a very strong central character and an adorable baby elephant. At the same time, it's sort of this avatar of larger concerns with the ivory trade and so forth. So how did you go from sort of the macro here, there's this bigger problem going on, to honing in on, this very specific entry point, to the point where I think some people may not even realize that this is a divisive issue when they see what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to take a little poll in the room, but is anybody in this room, do people think, just raise your hands if you think that ivory should be banned globally? Or, yeah, so not very controversial topic here. But yeah, where I just came up from the CITES Conference of Parties in Johannesburg, where this was the main battle of the last 3 years. I mean, it meets once every 3 years. And for us, we definitely didn't start off to make a controversial film. The Naledi was supposed to be a 4-minute web video about the birth of a baby elephant. That was the job that I was hired to do. And the elephants, Dr. Mike Chase was also launching the Great Elephant Census, and it happened to be that the birth took so long that we started filming the census as well. And Mike, the controversy of that topic, which probably won't land controversial to all you guys, he was born and raised in Botswana, the son of a professional hunter, has ivory in his home, grew up with ivory all around him, and grew up with ivory as a value commodity. And when we started the film, he said, well, look, I'm just a scientist, I just want to know how many elephants there are, and I want to keep me out of the ivory conversation. And over 2 years, 2.5 years of following that story, the conversation unfolded very organically, and it was very much our intention, as soon as we realized that we had a feature-length story on our hands, that I wanted the audience to really, no matter where they are, to have a universally accessible story. Vulcan was already doing the ivory game, and I also made a companion film to this called Mind of a Giant, which is about the science. So for this, we just wanted to be come in to watch this cute baby elephant and have this emotional story of a very intimate relationship. And I hope that by the end of the film, anyone watching it would never even think of having ivory in their lives. And right now we're working with a Chinese partner to get that released in China. It was very much our intent all along to make a film that could speak to the audiences that mattered to us on that topic, to be able to change those hearts.
So you're all working on, to a certain extent, as activists with stories to tell that sort of promote a certain sensibility or a way of instigating change. But at the same time, you're dealing with stories that could be problematic for the people that you're focused on. And so I want to set aside the word controversy for a little bit and instead focus on the word fear. Because the people that you're talking to, in many cases, can face all kinds of different repercussions. And in that sense, you have to work with different kinds of approaches to get them on camera when you can. So let's talk first about frame by frame, and Alexandria, maybe you can give us some sense of what it's like in Afghanistan to work with people who are probably afraid not only of repercussions from the government, but all kinds of different forces, and what sort of conversations you had to have with people to convince them that you would be responsible once they would put themselves in front of your camera.
Yeah, I think what was unique about this film going in is the photographers, they face that too. They have those conversations with their subjects. And so they knew so much of what we were talking about when we were saying, we want to tell your story, it wants to be a personal story, and what risks were involved with that. There were 3 male journalists photojournalists in the film, and then one female, Farzana Wahidi. And going in and meeting everyone, all of our male photojournalists were, one was not too excited, but curious about us and a little suspicious. Now we're best friends, but a little suspicious at first about how we were going to portray it. But Farzana, our female photojournalist, obviously has much more at stake than the rest of them. And at first she turned us down, that she didn't want to be a subject in the film. But then she found out that one of her mentors, one of her good friends, and her husband was going to be in it, and she was like, oh no, I'll be in it now. And she just didn't want the film to come out without any women in it at all. And which we were very excited that we put the pressure on her now, I think. But even now, I went and screened the film in Afghanistan in January, and at the U.S. Embassy and the French Embassy and ISAF, and ended up screening with the president of Afghanistan. But all of these screenings, even with the UN and everything, had to be private. Because I think if Farzana wasn't in the film, it wouldn't matter, because the male photographers, well, they're all public figures, everyone knows, but I think Farzana was just at such a risk, and still is, and the situation in Afghanistan is getting so much worse that it was just not possible, and it won't be possible to show that film publicly there.
That's a fascinating ongoing story then. And with climate change, obviously the challenges you face are very different, but at the same time we live in such a polarizing world that it seems as if even if science says one thing, when people speak up about a certain topic like this, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of criticism. So working on a film of this subject matter, which now in a sense is a genre unto itself, what are some of the challenges of getting people who can have influence on the way that we talk about climate change to actually make themselves available to you like this?
Well, I think the danger or the risk for people involved it's not so much for the people like the people in New York who have to deal with hurricanes from Sandy, or the South Pacific Islanders who are dealing with rising sea levels. It's more the people that are fighting the causes of climate change. So it's the people, the communities in the Amazon that are fighting the pipeline projects and that are trying to document the leaks. It's the people that are now at Standing Rock trying to fight the Dakota Access Pipeline. It's people fighting tar sands that are at risk of, in this country, high legal consequences, but in South America and Central America, activists are killed. Right before Josh and I went down to Peru to shoot our film in the Amazon to film a couple pipeline spills, 4 indigenous clear-cutting activists were murdered. And there's been no follow-up, and nobody's been convicted of those crimes because it's the fossil fuel companies that basically run the government. So when we're filming people in those situations that are trying to get those stories out, they know that they're making themselves targets. They know that the fossil fuel companies are going to know that those are the people that are outing them and outing the atrocities that they're committing. But it's worth it. Like they fully understand the risk that they're putting themselves in by sharing those stories, and that's what they've dedicated their lives to. They're watching people in their villages get sick and die from the poisoning that's coming from eating the fish that are coming out of these contaminated rivers. So they're making that choice, and it's a heavy responsibility. Deciding how to frame those stories and what to put out to the rest of the world of those stories in order to make their sacrifice worth it.
So Matt, you also had to deal with people who needed to speak up in order to provide you with the focus that you were looking for. But in many ways, the fear that you must have been feeling just from being where you were was only one step in that process, because you have all these people who are really putting their lives in danger, starting with a meth cook early in the film. What sort of conversations did you have with people to get them on board with exposing themselves in that way?
I think, you know, it's sort of the same conversation you have no matter what the situation is. But obviously, these were extremely sensitive situations, which is, you know, are you okay with the reality that, you know, your face, your image, your voice, your story will potentially be seen by, you know, thousands and thousands of people all across the world, and are you okay with the ramifications or implications of that? In the case of the meth cook, and that the opening scene of the film and the closing scene of the film, that's something that took about 9 months to get people on board. Not necessarily okay to be filmed, but just to get the sort of door opened. And once that door was open, they were okay to be filmed. Those conversations are always very, very difficult. And, you know, we live in a different world today in 2016 than we lived in even, you know, 10, 15 years ago, in which, especially 20 years ago, 30 years ago, in which you could really go to some exotic place in the world and say to someone in Africa, say to someone in wherever, you know, we really want to tell your story. We really feel like this is important for the world to know what you're going through. But, you know, most likely, people in Africa won't see that film. But now with YouTube, with the internet, it's hard to sort of make that promise. That image will most likely travel around the internet. And in the case of the meth cook, since you brought up, there was about 6 or 8 months after the film came out, somebody sent me an image on Facebook of a photoshopped image of the meth cook on the left side of the frame and his dead body on the right side of the frame. The obvious implication that he was killed because for being in the film. We don't know whether that's true. The rumors are that he was killed by his own men, had nothing to do with the film. The truth is, I'll never know, but it's something I think about all the time. And there's a saying in the cartel that we might as well live like kings, because we're gonna die by the time we're 30, and he was killed when he was 30. So, yeah, these are very, very, very tough issues. And I'm making a film right now in which the very, it's a little different than Cartel Land, and the very act of being in the film is legitimately putting their lives at risk. And so these are very hard conversations, and I had the subjects of my current film just view the film and made some very heavy conversations about the implications of that. And I think the most important thing as a filmmaker is to be transparent, is to be honest, is to have these conversations. Have them before you shoot, have them while you're shooting, have them after the film is done, and continue to have those conversations as it evolves. Because it is our responsibility to make sure that is done truthfully and honestly.
Emery, in your case, you took a sort of impromptu vote here, and it seems like everybody's pretty much anti the ivory trade. But given the fact that it is more complicated overseas, what were people afraid of when they were sort of when you approached them? I mean, are there repercussions for speaking out against this?
Yeah, I mean, just real quick for the first point is that you know, just yesterday I was walking up Fifth Avenue and I saw, you know, there's ivory on display here, Fifth Avenue, just a few blocks away, in shop windows still. So that, you know, even though everybody in this room raises our hands, the ivory trade is still alive and well in the United States, and you know, that I don't take that for granted. As far as the fear point, for us, I mean, it's going to sound so trivial next to what these guys have been talking about, but the main point was, as we were filming the census, there was a lot of concern over if we identify elephant populations in particular locations in Africa, if that would essentially paint a target on that elephant's back. And you know, we learned that you know, our main poster icon for that issue was that very early in the process in March 2014, my partner Kate sent her out to Kenya to film one of the census legs, and I specifically wanted her to find one of these last great tuskers, elephants who have tusks all the way down to the ground, who are 50 years old or more. And she found Satao, who was one of the most legendary elephants on the planet. And, he lived over 55 years and tusks to the ground, leader of many elephants, had friends and all the rest of it. And it ended up being that when we got the last footage of him, he was killed shortly afterwards. And for us, as we were going through making the film, we kept that memory of him very much in our hearts the whole way through. As I do, also makes an appearance in the Ivory game. So the main concern was making sure that we weren't putting any elephants' lives in danger by filming them. And so in the film, whenever we have locations, we have altered them, and we had those conversations again and again and again with scientists everywhere we went. It's pretty straightforward.
So I want to contextualize some of the things you guys are talking about by looking at the clips that you brought. We can start with frame by frame. Is there anything you want to say to kind of set up the excerpt that you brought with things?
It's a trailer, so
Trailer.
yeah.
Pretty self-explanatory. It's doing its job. Let's take a look. So Josh takes this very personal approach to the way that he tells these stories, but at the same time, by putting himself in front of the camera, he probably makes himself more vulnerable than if he weren't. So what sort of challenges did that create while you were working on this?
I haven't had that question before. It's
Well, it's
interesting.
the third time you've done it, right? So
Well, it's the third time Josh has done it. I came on just for this film. I wasn't on Gasland 1 or 2. As a result of the Gasland films, Josh was, totally barraged with criticism and death threats and all these things from industry people. This one, amazingly, had very little pushback. We got relatively no, hate mail and trolls and stuff, because with this film, we weren't necessarily targeting a specific industry. We weren't targeting somebody's revenue stream directly. It was more about, human values, and so compared to his other stuff, this was the threats with this one were more in where we shot it and to the people that are in it, and less to Josh himself.
that's interesting. And obviously he knows a little bit from going through those things anyway. So Cartel Land, shall we take a look? Not much to say.
I don't know.
Incredible scene, and you talked before a little bit about the tragic fate of the cook, but there are probably many different kinds of people like that you could have filmed. What was it about this particular situation that seemed like it was somehow something you could pull off? I mean, given the fact that it's a crime and people can get in trouble for it, it's sort of shocking that these people are talking to you even with their faces covered.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I wanted to film from the first time I stepped foot in Michoacan, which is where I was filming. Much of the violence, much of the drug industry, if you will, down there is centered around meth. The Knights Templar cartel, which is the cartel that our main subject we're fighting against, cook and transport meth. And so it was an incredibly important part of the story. And so literally from day one, I tried to get into a lab. Every single person I talked to, every single shoot, every single day, we would talk to people. Do you know somebody? You know somebody? You know somebody who's connected? And week after week, month after month, we failed. And then it was on our what turned out to be our last shoot. I got a call saying, "Be in this town square at 6 p.m. and you're in. And we had set up ground rules beforehand. I didn't want to be thrown in the back of the trunk, and had, you know, put a bag over my head, and they wanted their faces covered, which was obviously a relatively fair exchange. And so that's what happened. We went to the town square and we met them, met a group of masked men, and they drove us through these towns and smaller fields, and, you know, eventually out into the middle of this forest where they cook meth. And you know, it's something I dreamed about and thought about, and both artistically and in all, you know, senses of thinking about what it would mean for the subject, what it would mean for the story, how it would fit into the larger story. You know, talking to lawyers about the implications of showing people doing obviously illegal things. But, you know, like most things that we all experience, once you get into that situation, it's all just sort of instincts. And I dreamed of this scene, and I thought it would be, you've heard me say this before, but, you know, I thought it would be in this sort of, I've never seen Breaking Bad. I still haven't seen Breaking Bad, which I probably should see. But I thought it would be in this like halogen lit trailer like setup, and I get out there and it's this pitch black forest, and the sun was dipping beneath the mountains, and I don't shoot with lights. I don't know how to shoot with lights, and I was freaking out because I couldn't see a damn thing with my camera. And the head chef, whom you see on there, started showing me around the lab with his little flashlight, and it's with that little flashlight that I lit the scene. So it's not on topic of what you asked, but
Context is helpful, and one day you'll watch Breaking Bad to see if you nailed it or not.
Yes.
So, then Naledi, is this a clip, trailer?
Yeah, this is a clip. It's from quite late in the film, and it was important for us to have this scene in the film because, you know, those of us that work in wildlife programming, I've probably made over 30 wildlife shows over the years for TV, and the networks. You know, people, they say over and over again, you know, live animals work better than dead animals. And, you know, people don't want to see dead animals on TV. They watch wildlife shows like Planet Earth because they want to see the great shot of the iguana getting hit by the snakes. That's what they want to see, so just give them that. And so we always, when we make shows for, whether it's National Geographic or PBS or wherever, if we have something that is about conservation in it, we always have to try to sneak it in some door or another. And we have conversations a lot at our industry gatherings that are very, you know, navel-gazing, where we talk about what responsibilities we have. What we wanted to do was have a scene in the film that flips that question on the viewer. Now you've watched for over the last hour, really loved this cute baby elephant and cuddled with her and been with her ups and downs. So does that put a responsibility on you? That's what the clip's about.
Great, let's take a look. It's a dramatic moment that it seems like you play up very well, sort of the possibility that you could sort of relate to what this guy's talking about, get pulled into his narrative. And I think that, you know, before we take audience questions, it's worth addressing how that's been playing out, not only for you, but for all of you in terms of the films that you've made and the reactions that you get from them, because these films don't exist in a vacuum. People don't just watch them at home. Specifically with documentaries, you are often going to film festivals and doing Q&As with people who either agree or sometimes don't agree. So just relatively quickly, maybe we can get into this. What's it been like to engage with people who watch a movie like this one, let's say? And you know, to what extent do you feel like you have to kind of argue with people if they don't see things the way that you intend for them to see it?
Yeah, this film already, mostly we've done a lot of school screenings and we've done screenings at other festivals, and there was a lot of back and forth about having a scene like this in the film at all. We should maybe just lose the preachy bit and just, you know, have it be the story of this baby. But you know, every single time we have a screening, when we get to the end, credits roll and all the hands shoot up, everybody wants to know about ivory and know about how they can stop it and know how to protect them and what they can do, and that's been really wonderful. Mike, along his journey over the 2.5 years us constantly filming with him and going back and forth. He ended up becoming a huge champion to try to end the ivory trade. In Botswana, there was a moratorium, and as a result of the census, seeing that although Botswana has the largest elephant population on the planet, 150,000 elephants or more, and the largest single stockpile of ivory, Botswana has the most to gain from selling ivory. Between Mike and the president of Botswana, President Kama, and his brother, Minister Kama, they just announced in Johannesburg that they are voluntarily self-uplisting their elephant population to the highest protection level and increasing the ban, extending the ban on sales of ivory for another 10 years. So the process, I don't know if that's from them seeing the film, but the process of that journey has made that impact, and that's what we're very happy about. But at the same time, I just teared up watching that, because just yesterday, the water hole in Wange, 35 more elephants were poisoned yesterday. Yeah, in that same spot where we just saw that dead elephant. So.
You're all dealing with stories that are still developing. And Matt, in your case, you've dealt with something that, whether you're showing it in places in Mexico, people would have different opinions about what was going on there, or different parts of the United States, I'm sure. So what was that experience like? I'm sure that there were people who, saw a point of view in the film and wanted to argue with you about it. How much did you end up wading into those waters?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most surprising things for me was actually showing the film in Mexico, which was extremely, extremely important to us, making sure the film was released in Mexico. It was released in theaters there the same day it was released here. And going down there to do press and do stuff around the film, I just thought it would be part of sort of a body of work that they see every single day. I mean, literally every single day you open a paper in Mexico and you flip the paper over, and it's these horrific photos of mutilated bodies and beheaded and decapitations and awful, awful things on like mainstream newspapers. But I was really shocked when we first showed the film, and there was not a sort of dry eye in the room. And I think being able to sort of humanize this issue and take it out of the headlines and take it out of stats and gore, and in many ways the cartels have been sort of glorified in TV shows and in movies and soap operas and other things, and sort of see this issue humanized in a personal way, I think really moved people. And I think the film was seen by a bunch down there, and that dramatic irony is not dramatic, but the irony is that it is now on every single street corner of bodega, and that black market is controlled by the cartel. So they're making money on a movie about themselves. So sadly.
So Alexandria, how did the movie screen in Afghanistan? What sort of reactions do you see from people about how the situation there and how it's depicted in the film?
Yeah, we got a taste of what Afghans felt about the film before I even went back to Afghanistan, because we screened in London and LA and DC and Australia and different diasporas that were abroad, that people were either had moved in the Soviet era or just recently come to the United States. So we had every screening, it would be like 2 or 3 people that we would see come up. We're like, oh, some Afghans came, and they would. Something that I was terrified about was like, what would Afghans think of this film? And I mean, it's a scary thing, especially not being Afghan myself. What would they think about the portrayal? And everyone was really wonderful, and we had such a great reaction. In Kabul itself, the U.S. Embassy held a screening, and they invited. We invited so many people. The journalism community in Kabul is very small and very tight. Everyone knows each other. We invited so many people to the Afghan embassy, or to the American embassy, to see the film, and someone had told me that was the most Afghans that had been in the U.S. embassy maybe ever. So it was a powerful screening. I couldn't stop crying the entire time because everyone knew everyone in the film, and in the film, one of the journalists that we filmed actually died while we were editing. And so you could just feel the entire room tense up when he came on screen, and that's not something, obviously no one knows that while you're seeing the film in the States, but you could feel the entire room just start to cry when he came on screen, and his scene is actually pretty funny and light. And their reaction, thankfully, was just so supportive. What was really horrible is while we were screening, they take away your cell phones when you go into the embassies. And the U.S. Ambassador was really happy to see me in the beginning, and after the film, he was really strange and teary-eyed, and I was like, wow, he was really affected by the film. But he left suddenly, and I was like, oh, what's going on? And a few weeks before that, the Taliban, or maybe a month before that, the Taliban had claimed that one of the main media outlets in Kabul was now a target for them because of an article that they had put out. And during the screening, they had a suicide bomber attack a bus full of journalists that were going home from work. And that was the first time that the Taliban had specifically targeted journalists and media outlet. And that was, Masood, who's in my film, his brother's girlfriend was on that bus. It was like friends of everyone. Everyone knew everyone on that bus. It was such a tight community. So what was so scary about that screening, it was like we're all so happy and joyful and hugging, and it was such an amazing screening, and then right when we get out and everybody's getting their cell phones, it's like we all just, everybody headed to the hospital. 11 people died. It was all, so it was a very sobering few weeks, and because it just felt like this film came out at a very specific time in early 2015 where the government hadn't changed hands yet. There was still most media outlets had left Afghanistan. Bureaus were shutting down. There's been obviously a lot of people are turning their eyes away from Afghanistan towards Syria and other places, and it's gotten a lot worse. So it was kind of this weird screening where it just felt like, yeah, this was this time, and it feels like it's just going in a completely worse direction now.
So speaking of risk, you all have put yourselves in the line of fire, though I would say that Dea, you probably, of the people on the stage, epitomize that more than anyone else because of the situation that you're facing right now. Before we go to questions, I want to hear a little bit from you about this, not to put too fine a point on it, but how has this situation you've been through as a documentary producer and this terrible sentencing that you've faced changed your relationship to what you do and the way you think about what you want to do next?
It's I mean, obviously unbelievably frustrating to know that I didn't break a single law, and the government of North Dakota is basically limiting the information that the message loud and clear out there, that I want to do everything in my power to make sure that I don't say or do anything that would keep other filmmakers and journalists and reporters from going and covering these things. I think because of because of the state coming down so hard on people in the media, it should be a red flag to everybody in the media that these stories are that much more important to cover and get out there.
Well, thank you for fighting the good fight. So we have time for maybe one or two questions. If you want to just shoot your hand in the air, and just make sure to project, please. Just repeat the question really quickly. It's basically, how do you protect your hearts from being broken when you're so emotionally involved in these issues, and there's a certain amount of objectivity necessary to do your job?
I don't think you do. I think you put it into your film, and that's what can make films powerful. It is sharing that emotion with your audience, and it also makes you feel less alone.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, a film I completely agree. A film I'm making right now is about a woman named Nadia Murad who is a survivor of genocide by ISIS in northern Iraq. She's part of the Yazidi community, and she was enslaved for 3 months by ISIS as a sex slave. She escaped, and now she's been thrown and hurtled into this position where she's speaking for, and she's kind of the face of this cause, and she's 23 years old, and 18 members of her family were killed in front of her. So I think being there with her, it's not really the interviews, it's more just like sitting with her in the quiet times, being on a long lens on her when she's in these meetings and everyone's just bustling around her, and seeing what she's like what's on her face in those times, and listening to her like whispering and practicing her speeches on her breath on her mic. I think you're kind of, as a filmmaker, watching 300 hours of that versus the however long, short period of time that you're actually giving an audience. You're kind of digesting all of that, and I agree with Dea completely. It's kind of this thing where I feel like I'm opening my chest and just getting completely beat up and bruised by the reality of my subject's situation, and then I'm only trying to translate that to the audience to hope that it's even a small bit of what I've had to witness and trying to tell. So yeah, I think that's a moment when that job, and that is what I'm in love with job, and that's actually what I feel most honored by, is that for a moment I'm allowed to witness this and translate it.
I was just say, I think the very nature of the fact that you're in the bushes crying is why you should be making the film. And I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of or question. I think it's beautiful and it's natural, and that's why you should be making the film. And I think one other quick thought is, I'm a big fan of what Dea and Josh do. A huge fan of your films. We're like on the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of filmmaking. Like, I'm not in my films. You literally and figuratively see Josh's heart beating in the film, whereas I'm not present at all. But I think just the act of making these films is what's important, and there's different ways of doing so.
My one quick thing to add, I agree with all of that. My word of caution would be that then later when you're in the edit room is to be careful of allowing that emotion to overwhelm the story, or for me, I really often get into like, I really want to go all the way down the preachy dissertation route, and I want to say all the reasons why this is wrong, or all the reasons why the environmental things, and to make sure that you have somebody that's going to be in your edit room, or going to be in that collaborative process with you, that's going to help make sure that the emotion that you're feeling is getting translated in the most impactful way it can in that scene, and making sure that the story isn't being sacrificed.
Okay, another hand over here. Yep, you.
I was just going to say, you put yourself in such dangerous situations, like death situations.
You prepare yourselves emotionally for the kind of danger that you put yourselves in, and what are some practical steps you take as well? Everybody's pointing at Matt.
Well, as somebody who's, I've been on the receiving end of charging elephants, and been on meth lab raids, and dangling off of helicopters and all the rest of it many times. I'm sure all of us here have faced all kinds of ridiculously dangerous situations. I think for emotionally preparing yourself for those situations, what works for me is to know, A, am I mitigating the risks as sensibly as I can going into the situation, and B, am I, if the bad thing happens and I end up in the hospital or killed, or lose my crew, would they be proud to die in that moment? Would I be okay with that? That's for me a very important filter. Just last week, a producer who was working on location for Discovery Science Pumpkin Chunkin. I'm sure everybody saw the news that producer is now in an induced coma, and there was a terrible accident, and the conversation kept happening. Did that need to is that level of risk necessary for that person, for that story to be told, and would you be willing for that to occur? And certainly all of our thoughts are with her.
Anyone else want to address that right quick? Sort of preparing yourself emotionally for the dangerous situations you put yourself into. I know, Matt, you threw yourself into a lot with your camera.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's physical risk and there's psychological risk. And they're two vastly different things. In Cartel Land, there's a lot of physical risk. And I think for that, instincts, life, fight or flight, evolution sort of takes over, at least it did for me. And you sort of, at least for me, it was a very out-of-body experience of being behind the camera and the camera being me, and just the very act of operating the camera helped sort of somewhat detach me from the reality of the danger that I was in. Just focusing on exposing, focusing on framing, making sure the record button was on. These things sort of helped detach me somewhat from the reality of what was happening. But, Eric's heard me say this, but, for me, by far the scariest stuff in Cartel Land was not the shootouts, was not the meth lab, was not the torture chambers, was, the testimonies of the victims. And one in particular, a woman whose husband was kidnapped by the cartel alongside her, and she witnessed him being chopped up to pieces and then burned to death in front of her. And to be in this room with this woman and have her sitting right in front of me, and her body was there, but it was as if the cartel had sucked the soul out of her. And that, her eyes, her stare, her hollow stare, had stuck with me way more than any of the sort of adrenaline-filled moments in the film.
So there's a certain dark overtone to some of the things we've talked about today, but I just wanted to close by saying all of your abilities to sort of shine light on different things that are wrong with the world today, I think gives a lot of us hope that we can still talk about it and look at it through the lens of the stories you tell. So thank you. And thanks,
I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much. You're amazing filmmakers. Emery and Matt. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Alexandria.